Says we are live. Hello, everybody. My name is Chad Lupkes. This is Total Growth Investing. This is a haphazard and off-the-cuff live stream. Uh, James O'Neill from the Interstellar New Deal, who also goes by Free Xenon, is an old friend that I've been chatting with and talking back and forth. He live streams on Twitch, and I comment in his threads, and then I go live stream and he comments on mine. And I thought a face-to-face would be fun. And there's not much difference in how we actually see the future going. It's just so much difference in how we talk about it. And so I thought a conversation would be fun. So this is an hour conversation because why not? James, how are you doing?
Good. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on. It's good to actually put a face to the name over the years.
Yeah. Well, I know I need to trim this. It's been a couple of months, but so you've been in the Futurist Society, the Venus Project advocates, things like that for a little while. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that history and how you got started down this rabbit hole?
How far to go back? Well, I started my journey into politics 2005, and it started with social sexual issues. And then after the gay rights became legal here in the U.S., then I branched out into minimum wage and poverty and that sort of a thing. And then like a few years prior to 2017, I had known that money was the problem, but I didn't understand. I couldn't wrap my head around that. How do you start questioning that or figuring that out? Then for my birthday in 2017, I usually take a vacation. And for that time, I decided, okay, I remember this Venus Project thing. I remember seeing, the beautiful graphics. So I was like, okay, I'm going to check this out and see what this is. So I spent that week. I watched the documentaries. I bought his book, read it. They also mentioned the Zeitgeist movement, and I went to them, watched all of them, bought that book, and I read all of that. And it's like, okay, this is it. This is what I would never have been able to put my brain around in the next 50 years. They've kind of summarized the problem and the solution as well. And since 2017, I spent the last 3-4 years just investigating that, researching, reading. I've been doing a lot of blogging on this concept as a part of my journey into understanding it and so on. So it's been, it was a revelation, just a huge revelation about, especially with the New Human Rights Movement by Peter Joseph, his book. He really goes into depth and into detail talking about the harms of inequality and things of that nature. And it was just amazing.
Okay. So I think the main course, what I wanted to do during this hour is ask about capitalism itself, how we define it, and things like that, because total growth investing is an investment strategy within the stock market and in general. And from what I'm reading on your site, the Interstellar New Deal, and what I understand about Jacques Fresco and what he was saying within the Venus Project, he wants all of that to just completely go away. And I wanted to dive a little bit into what that means and what capitalism is, and the core question: does capitalism in any form have any future for humanity? Have any part of the future of humanity?
Okay.
So that it's the big question as we move into the 21st century, with the stock market going crazy, with cryptocurrencies going crazy, and how are we going to transition into a Venus Project type civilization, or my own advocacy for the Living Universe Foundation, expanding us into a type 1, maybe a type 2, and then beyond that, however far we can go. So go ahead.
Yeah, I talk about the same thing in my policies as well. It boils down to, getting to the type 1 civilization. I have a whole post on that as well, is going to be the first part. And then it's going to a type 2 as well. I don't think it's possible, of course, to do it within a monetary system, but it's highly unlikely that we as a globalized civilization will last that long. because of climate change and things of that nature. But yeah, having humanity survive is kind of the imperative.
So how do you define capitalism at its core? Well, like what does the word actually mean to you?
The use of money or methods of exchange markets to determine how to buy and sell things. I really don't get that deep or technical into it.
Okay. So let's break it up then. What is capital?
Oh, stuff, money, and then, of course, labor.
Okay. So capital is what we need to do work. It's either equipment or it's financial capital to be able to move things around in a market system or whatever. And then and this is the way that I see it, capitalism is any system that uses capital to get work done.
Okay, sure.
Okay. And the way, I mean, if you watch the broadcasts that have been put onto YouTube from Michael Saylor, the CEO of MicroStrategies, and the way that he's been talking about Bitcoin over the last couple months, he sees Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and all of that as financial energy, and it's a way to store and then release financial energy under the control of people. So like if I earn money from a job, I am choosing when to release that financial energy by making the purchases that I want to make. And until I make that decision to spend that money and make those purchases, that's sort of potential energy. It's not there yet. In a system without money, like the Venus Project, how would the ebbs and flows of the timing differences between when we want something, when we need something, and when we can actually get it be resolved?
So the core, and I talk about that in one of my posts. I think the Facebook Q&A, it boils down to it's a global system, a globalized resource management system. And it comes down to what are our resources, what can we equitably provide all of humanity, and then it comes down to the localized economy and the global economy as well, based on resource and needs and desires.
Okay. It sounds like you're talking about just-in-time inventory management, where
to an extent, yes. Yep.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So if we want a tomato in, I don't know, in Africa someplace, and they're not growing tomatoes there, if we want it, we have to order it ahead of time to have it shipped from wherever it's farmed from. Right?
Well, no. Yeah, not necessarily, because it's based on big data, right? Because it'll already know the basic trends of what's going to be happening in Africa, and then also the hyper-localizing of food production through vertical farming and that sort of stuff. So the localized community, you try to make communities as sustainable as possible, having their own energy production, their own food production. So the community itself will know what food it's going to need based on years of data, so that it will have the farms and to set up to do that, or it'll import it as needed. So it's more like precognitive just-in-time production.
Okay. Do you see a discrepancy between the hyper-localized versus the globalized, versus a globalized culture that is trading information? And since we're talking about food, trading recipes and saying, try this combination of spices from various places and things like that. Do you see a discrepancy between the hyper-localization of food production and the ability to get new ideas, not just for food, but for anything on the globalized scale?
Oh God, no. Because the resource-based economy is the globalization of pretty much everything. One of the core sourcing everything and taking advantage of the entire global brain trust. One of the examples I give in my post is this, I don't know, I'm paraphrasing here, a guy in Portugal has this amazing new recipe because he's got his own little show or whatever everything. And then that goes into the global database of recipes and learn how to make it. But not only that, the automated chefs will have access to it and will be able to make that for anyone in the world.
Okay, cool. All right. So it doesn't sound like you think that capitalism or that the monetary exchange is a necessary part of any of that.
No, definitely not.
So anybody should be able to order anything they want without cost?
Yep.
Okay. So what about the actual energy costs? What about the actual fuel costs or the transportation costs or the timing differences and things like that? Those are delays in the system, or they're things that right now we pay for using monetary systems to be able to manage those differences in timing and schedule, and being able to pay the people to drive the cars. Now, I know autonomous driving, autonomous trucks, and all of that for the a futuristic transportation system. We'll get to the transition in a bit, but I just want to say, when we get to that stage, all of those costs, even if they're lower, will still be there. Do they matter?
Well, of course they do, because it's about resources, right? The cost you pay is in resources, energy, materials to make them, and that goes into the entirety of the resource management, the globalized resource management plan, making it sustainable and figuring out how much everyone can get access to and what is required to sustain society and to advance society based on whatever the globalized plan is for the civilization's advancement.
Okay. Who comes up with the plan?
That is the question. And that's the hardest thing to answer. I talk about that in my post on what a resource-based economy might look like if it was to come into being. We don't have that answer. What I basically say is, again, you've got at each level, you've got people. First you have the high levels of automation and the AI to plan and manage everything as well as we can. And if there are decisions that need to be made, there'll be people at those various levels to make those decisions on how to adjust the AI to change how the resources are made or where to build or that sort of thing. So AI first, based on what we design and program, and then we get into people at the various levels to make those decisions. How those people get into those positions, we don't really know, because this is a world that's going to be far beyond anything that we have today. So I don't know exactly. I don't know. Most likely it'll be based on professionals who are like at the top of their field and that sort of thing. It'll be some say like a technocracy, technocratic method in a sense. That's kind of the way I see it, but I don't, we don't really exactly know.
Yeah, I hear I hear this phrase a lot when you're talking about technocrats. Just because you can do a thing doesn't necessarily mean that you should do a thing. Okay. So what we have right now are democratic systems, at least in theory, that allow the general populace to choose which direction we want to go. And it gets ugly, but the people having the base level decision-making power is at least important enough, at least it was important enough to the founders of the United States to put that into the Constitution. Evolving beyond that, having technocrats tell us how to do stuff is one thing, but who do you think should decide whether we should do a thing?
Oh, that's going to be the entirety of human civilization in one form or another. Again, I read about that when I post. How do we get to that transition point and who makes those decisions? We don't know. It could go a lot of different ways as to how we collectively as a civilization make the choice to do that. Who knows? It's so far in the future, and our society, our civilization is so fucked up that we just, how do you even picture a humanity reaching that point where we decide that murdering each other for stuff is ridiculous, when we could be so much farther ahead by cooperating.
Oh, I
mean,
agree with that.
It's just we're so messed up by everything we've done to each other that we can't comprehend peace or cooperation. Getting to that point is the problem. Is the question.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that for years, and to me, it boils down to a choice between two different directions, two different paths, and two different destinations. And I think I've shown you a post on this before, but let me put it out for the audience that's watching now.
Mhm.
There are two paths and two destinations. The path of control leads to power, and the path of cooperation leads to peace. You've got so many people in politics, in economics, in finance and business and things like that, who think that in order for them to achieve peace, they have to take control or they have to have control. And it is not working. It has never worked, and I don't think it can. It's like you can't get to a destination of peace through a field of war.
Yes.
If you're taking control, of resources, if you're taking control of financial capital, of land, of all of the farms, et cetera, in order to try to distribute it better than what it's being done now, you're searching for power, and power corrupts. I think that's an old Roman phrase, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, blah, blah, blah. But that's just the thing. If you're taking control of something, then you're not looking for peace. You're looking for power, and you've got to change your path. The other side of it is, the more you cooperate, the more you learn how to cooperate, the more you listen to other people's viewpoints, other people's experiences, and things like that, the more consensus you are able to achieve, and the closer you are to the peace that you really want, that everybody really wants.
Yeah, what I say is basically, you don't have the history to support that transition. The history of peace and cooperation beforehand, it's hard to bring about peace and cooperation when you're murdering for cooperation.
So let's set murder aside, because I don't want to go into the possibilities of 21st century wars. The 20th century was bad enough. But we do have something that came into the news a little while ago, saying that water futures were going to be traded on the commodities markets. And I see people in my feeds and in my circles all up in arms about this, because it means that it's going to be commoditized, and if you can't afford water, then just you don't get water. And it's like, I can see that, but at the same time, I don't see it happening. I see the potential for a whole lot of conflict about it, but I don't think that we're going to step onto that burning bridge. At least I hope not. What do you think?
I'm significantly much more cynical about how horrible humanity really is. I mean, we had Nestle, right, stealing, taking the water and bottling it and selling it, and they finally lost that battle. And we've got people saying that, some CEOs said that if you can't afford water, you shouldn't have it, that sort of thing. So, I mean, the brain damage that we have, the sociopathy that we have from monetary systems, from income inequality and affluence is there, especially here in the United States, where we have the highest level of income inequality in the developed world. So in this country, I wouldn't put it past the people, and the corporations and everyone to do that. But I think you're right. Yeah, that the outcry against that would be significant. Water should be it is a human right, and it should be treated that way. But corporations don't care about that.
It's like the woman in Congress who has called on public utilities, or utilities, energy, to be public utilities, not private corporations.
Nina Turner. Yep.
Yeah. So water is one thing, energy is another, and what we've been seeing happen in Texas because of the freeze is another really good example of that, because they can, I mean, we will let the news agencies dig into the details of why it happened, but big picture, Texas has decided to go on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not on the East Coast grid, it's not on the West Coast
Uh-huh.
grid, it's in their own grid,
Uh-huh.
and they've privatized as much as possible. And how many people have starved? How many people have frozen?
Uh-huh.
It's not cool. Um, okay, we've got comments coming in. Here's one from Tim. I'm not sure I'd trust the
Oh,
government
that's
to
cool.
manage utilities.
Oh, what I'd say to that is it isn't, I wouldn't necessarily put it under like nationalizing them. You could do that, but I would see it more as public utilities, as in the local governments, or the utilities are publicly owned.
Right.
And there's been a lot of, the places where that has been done, it's been very successful and typically outperforms privately owned utilities.
So how do you define outperformed? You used a word, so let's define that. What do you mean by outperformed?
More efficient, less downtime, cheaper.
Okay. So you didn't say 100% efficiency. You didn't say zero downtime.
That's not a thing.
It's not a thing. Exactly.
It's not a thing.
It's not exactly. So, and I had this come up in a comment thread as well, saying, well, are you saying that government taking over is going to mean that nobody will ever lose power again? It's like, no, that's not what we're saying. Okay. Public utilities exist all across the country and all around the world. Okay. And all that it means is that the people responsible are held to account during elections, or they're appointed by people
Or something
who
like that.
are held account by elections.
Yeah.
Okay. The objective of any system, of any utility system, is to make sure that there are no interruptions in service, or that interruptions in service due to disaster, due to accident, or whatever are dealt with quickly. And a privatized system versus a public system, I'm reminded of the movie Gangs of New York. If you've ever seen that movie, oh, you got to see the movie.
Yeah.
It's fun. There's one particular scene where the fire department comes out to respond to a house fire, and the person who owns the house who's on fire has not been paying the fire department their due, and so the fire department decides to just let it burn because they haven't been paid already.
Libertarian paradise. Awesome.
That's objectivist paradise or whatever, and that's what I'm seeing from Texas.
Well, from what I've read about Texas, it's explicitly they're trying to avoid federal regulation because fuck the federal government. But it's also that with when they put together their wind farms, they didn't have them set up for cold weather as a method of saving money.
Decision. Right.
Yeah.
That was a specific decision that they made because Texas doesn't get cold weather or whatever.
Yeah.
So I had another thought that I wanted to get into on that. Let's see. There it is. How do utilities pay for this thing? Okay. Whether it's public or private, how do they build the energy facilities and the water piping systems and et cetera, et cetera? How do they finance that stuff?
I don't actually know how they've actually been doing it, but I expected it would be more or less from two places, taxes, and then also, of course, from possibly investors taxes and investors, I think would be the initial part. And then after that, it comes down to how much money they make as well as taxes.
Okay. Well, I can give a little bit more detail on that. So What we're talking about is the bond market. Whether we're talking about corporate bonds or municipal bonds or state municipal or even federal, whatever, the bond market is a global financial market where, let's say that my city of Seattle wants to build a new, they want to put a lot of money into the into the water system. They've got a plan that they figure is going to cost $50 million. Okay. For a giant utility, for an entire city, that's honestly reasonable. 50 million is not a whole lot of money for something like that.
Okay.
So what they do is they come out with a bond offering saying, we need $50 million to be able to put people to work building this system. That bond offering goes into the bond markets, usually in New York City. And that's where the investors pile in and say, yes, we're going to buy these bonds. The money that they use to buy the bonds goes back to the city of Seattle, and Seattle puts people to work.
Okay.
Those bonds charge an interest, but they also have to be paid back over time, usually 15, 30 years, something like that. The money that goes to paying those bonds back, that's where taxes come in. Because the bond offering has to go onto a referendum within the city of Seattle or whatever municipality, and the people of Seattle decide that we want this water system to be upgraded. We know it's going to cost $50 million. We're willing to pay the taxes to repay the bonds so that we can get people put to work to build this thing.
Okay. Good to know.
So that's how that works. And that's true whether we're talking a public utility owned by the government or a private utility owned by a corporation. Because if a corporation wants to put together a $50 million plan, they do the exact same thing. They put together a bond offering and they put it onto the market. The corporate bond market is actually as big as the municipal bond market in some places, for some ways, but it's the exact same process. So in the Venus Project world, on that plateau of a type 1 civilization, how would that be managed? Or would it just be built because we have the resources, we have the energy, we have the plan, let's just do it?
That's exactly it. We have it and it's needed, so we just do it.
Okay. So I've heard you say, and I've seen you type, that nobody really knows how to make the transition between where we are now and that magical type 1 plateau. Do you have any ideas on how to get there?
Well, in the post, when I talk about that you were commenting on how to get to resource-based economy, I talk about that, getting to that transition state. But again, at every turn, the biggest weakness in that process is the United States. The United States is the largest terrorist organization in the world, the largest polluter, especially when it comes to war, and we have the largest political and economic power in the world. If the United States was on board and said, hey, saving humanity from extinction, shifting to resource-based economy, if they were to shift their politics and their money towards that, we could quickly, within, 50, 60, 70 years, get most of the earth almost ready for that sort of a thing.
Okay.
But basically,
I remember seeing in one of your posts that there is no magic wand.
Yes. When talking to capitalists about this, they always my Facebook Q&A, that's where I talked about that, because he's like, well, this is going to happen, quote, magically for this and that and the other thing. No, magic doesn't exist. It takes time. I specifically covered, it would take at least 4 generations from the moment that we decided to do this to get to the point.
Talk about that generational transition.
Okay, I have to pull this up because there's parts to this.
If you want to share your screen, you're welcome to.
Oh, that's fancy. All right, just to find it. Let me find it. Here it is. Super fancy. All right, let me check. Here it is. Okay, here we go. All right.
So hit share screen down on the bottom.
Oh. Sharing screen. This one.
There we go.
Super fancy. Okay, so what I say here, and can you share the link to this? Can I share the link to this somewhere?
Yeah, I will take care of that.
Okay, I put it in private chat. So you have it there. So what I basically say is, it's an infrastructure change, especially in second and third world countries, which have been massively exploited by the developed world. Take at least 4 generations in each RBE city, resource-based economy city, to eventually evolve beyond the social and psychological damage of to evolve fully our resource-based economy society. Because by virtue of being within a monetary system, capitalism, we have brain damage from it. And this goes through people, especially people who are impoverished, but also it affects people who are rich as well. There's 2 amazing books on this. The spirit level, the inner level, kind of talk about that. So the first generation will have the full brain damage from capitalism, and would start the healing process, right? Because they'll have the first brand new cities, and they're suffering from inequality and the psychological damage from a lifetime of that. Then the first generation born within that resource-based economy will have the parents with the brain damage, and then those children will still suffer from the parents with the brain damage, but they'll exist in a much freer society, because they'll have all the stuff, all of their needs met. And then their children's children, the third generation, will have parents who've had a little bit of brain damage inflicted by their parents, and then they'll be closer to not having suffered from monetary systems. And then the fourth generation will be the freest, because they'll have the smallest amount of damage, residual monetary systems and inequality.
Okay. All right. We've got another question from Tim. What about China and India and every place else? Don't they also have to get on board? And the answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I talk about this, I actually recently changed my policies at Interstellar New Deal to kind of talk about this a little bit. One of the issues we have with emerging markets is, especially in second and third world countries, is that they are they're going through the demographic transition, very similar to the way the United States did. Fossil fuels, unbridled capitalism, exploitation, child labor, and all that sort of stuff. So if the United States would be willing to step up and to be a power force for good in the world, we could help these emerging markets shift from second, third world status, or from polluting, and jump directly as much as possible into a first world status. And we could do that, but it's hard to do it when there's competition, nations against nation. When doing that, competition is antithetical to cooperation. Mm-hmm. But yes, China and India would definitely have to get on board.
So, how much I'm seeing this a lot. A lot of people have the impression that China is a downtrodden third world country. When, if you look at the Chinese media, even if you filter out the hype that they give themselves, some of the biggest companies in the world are Chinese companies that are on the New York Stock Exchange, et cetera, but they're doing all the technology and infrastructure development work in China that we would want to see, that we talk about, that you talk about. They're building these cities probably too fast because their population is not moving into them, but they're building the infrastructure that they need to be able to do this. They've also got the New Silk Road Initiative, which is a plan that they have to create a trade line for goods and services from China to Europe
Hmm.
that is pretty darn huge.
Cool.
India is also getting on board. I mean, Elon Musk just announced that he had come to a deal with the Indian government to be able to build a Tesla factory there, so that
Nice.
his electric cars can be built locally. There's your
Mhm.
hyperlocalization for the India market. This is something that does not happen in India. India
Mhm.
has very strict rules on foreign corporations coming in and doing anything, but he
Hmm.
was able to break through that barrier
Nice.
because there is so much demand in the Indian market for renewable energy and for the electrification of their transportation grid.
Cool.
So that's, it is happening. But I see a lot of people who think that China is still this backwater country. And it's like that ceased to be true in around 2005.
Well, I think a lot of it still is true. I mean, for a lot of those people, this is very similar to Russia as well. Sure, you got the major cities where things are okay, but outside of that, you still have people without running water, who are doing subsistence farming and that sort of a thing.
We have that in the United States too.
Yes, we do, especially around the Appalachia, that area.
Not just there, all over the country. The
Oh yeah.
inequality that we see in the United
Yes.
States is really dependent on how close to an urban center you are. But then again, our urban centers, look at Detroit. Over the last 100 years, we've seen all the manufacturing be picked up and moved to another country.
I wonder why that is.
Yeah, profits.
Hmm.
All right, let's get back to the transition, because I do see a path.
Okay.
And I don't know exactly how to express it, but I see a path through the systems that we have now in a way that might actually work. There's a video that I watched a couple years ago. It's called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. It talks about blockchain. It talks about cryptocurrencies a little bit, but mostly about the potential of integrating blockchain into our industrial, retail, and commercial space in such a way that it was really exciting. I'll share the link on this page or on this post after the stream, but look in YouTube for the Fourth Industrial Revolution and you should be able to find it.
Okay.
Basically, the guy was talking about the possibility of scanning a barcode for a product in our stores and be able to trace it back
Yes.
all the way to raw materials, knowing not just where it came from, but who touched it every single point along the path.
Amen, brother.
Okay? This is where cryptocurrencies comes in, because right now, and I'm in retail, so I can tell you, right now we use UPCs, we used harmonized tariff schedule codes, we use all of this data to identify a product, but we're nowhere near close to actually using it up to potential.
Oh,
And
definitely.
I don't think anybody is, not even Amazon. They have a clue, but they're really not doing it because they're working internally within their own organization. Okay. Once something hits their dock, they can trace it to the shelves, to a box, and out the door to a customer. But with blockchain, we'll be able to say, okay, break down that wall, get out of that silo, because that product is made of raw materials, and we'll be able to see where each and every one of those raw materials came from, who touched it, how their lives are. It really depends on how much transparency we want to put into the system. But there's
Yeah, that's pretty much the way I see a resource-based economy. If you want to go online, this product that you're wearing right now, where was it manufactured? Where did the resources come from? That's a very much core of that big data of that resource management that a resource-based economy would be based off of.
Okay. So as far as the transition, how do we get there? It comes down, at least to me, to costs. how do we manage the costs of doing it? Right now, those costs are measured in currency. They're measured in monetary exchange. Okay. In the type 1 civilization that you advocate for, it's not. But how do we get from something that has cost down to something that has no cost?
That is the question, right?
Well, the answer is you keep reducing the costs. Okay.
Yeah,
Economies of scale.
Mhm.
Economies of scale, for example, for solar. Okay. Right now, it costs X amount of US dollars or whatever to generate a certain amount of energy with a solar panel because of the way the solar panels are created, because of how many solar panels there are, etc. Okay. The more solar panels there are, the lower that cost becomes. The more people producing solar panels, the lower those costs get. The way that I see this transition, and I'm glad you said that it was 50 or 60 years or even 80 years for that generational transition. The way I see this working is let's set a goal so that the costs are low enough to where we can just simply choose not to turn off the systems.
Yeah, the only issue with that is the profit motive. Because as long as there's a profit motive, the transition will not happen because there's too much money to be made in doing it. We have to absolutely work towards annihilating inequality and the profit motive, and that's the most difficult thing because once they've got the power and their luxury, letting go of the profit motive is very difficult. My policies kind of work towards that a little bit. I don't quite attack what you're talking about specifically, but changing our value system to value sustainability, equity, and things of that nature can be part of that answer. Then also shifting our government policy to ensure that our businesses work towards sustainability, not just sustainability, but regenerative, open source, circular economies. And I think if you approach it kind of that way, you might be able to get to what you're talking about because the values will be in there and also so will be the business processes that will support that, the regenerative, open source, circular economy, which zero marginal cost, but also give us the eco-humanistic values to realize, okay, so we've gotten to this point, everything's awesome, so why the hell do we need money?
Pretty much. So the first step towards that is recognizing the triple bottom line, that profit is only one thing that we need to get out of the system. And then we can slowly reduce it down because it becomes unnecessary. Okay. Right now, people think that that a high profit margin is really a necessary part of business. In all honesty, we need to redefine profit as the benefit that it provides for humanity, for the world, et cetera, et cetera. If we can start to redefine that, then it's not just monetary systems that profit from a business enterprise.
Yeah, what I changed my policies fairly recently. What I say is that we need to shift the focus of what businesses are there for. The primary focus currently is profit. That's all that matters. Now we need to shift towards doing good for humanity and doing good for the natural world. The motive for businesses has to change in order for the system to change. So if we tack that there, that could have a lot of change evolve that way.
It can, but like you said, there's no magic wand. So doing a 100% transition away from monetary profit into a system where we can see the benefit for everything, for everybody, that needs to be a transition. That needs to be a step process.
Yep.
So the C corporation and things like that, that would be a step along that path.
Yep. Exactly.
Okay. So along that line, I had an idea that I put out into the cryptocurrency space that I've been trying to get attention, but it's not really getting attention. Take a look for the Veterans Family Fund. I think I've mentioned this to you before. The Veterans Family Fund is based in Clark County, Washington, around the Vancouver area. and they have a interesting way to generate revenue for their systems. They sell bonds, so to speak, but it's certificates of deposit through local banks. And a lot of the banks, the local state banks here in Washington, offer these bonds. And the way it happens is you put money into these bonds, it does generate an interest. Half of that interest goes to the charity, half of it goes back into the account to build up the balance of the bond itself. So it's not taking money out of your account. It's not a direct donation from your paycheck, from your wallet. But as the economy generates revenue, these certificates of deposit earn interest, and that interest is split. So it's building a foundation that never goes away, and you're providing things for this particular charity. I don't see any other charities using this, but I think something like this using the cryptocurrency space, where the staking rewards for Ethereum, for Algorand, for a number of the others could be used to say, I have this many, and I want to split the returns that come back from the staking rewards to give money to these causes, to this wallet, this charity, that organization, this cause. But it's never going to reduce my balance. It's just the system constantly generating the new coins and the growth of the system itself that is building this revenue stream. Do you see what I'm?
I'm trying to process it. So you're saying it's based on certificate of deposits. So I go and I buy a CD, which is blockchain based, right? Is that what you're saying? Okay. So eventually, then the interest goes to various other places. I don't get the interest directly, but most of it all goes to the original place.
No, not all.
No.
So just think about it simply, where the interest that we get, let's say it earns 5%. Okay, 2.5% is going to go back into the wallet to compound and build the balance. The other 2.5%. What?
That builds the balance for who?
For you.
Okay, so I get basically half the interest.
Right. You get half the interest.
Gotcha.
And an organization, let's say a charity or a cause or a community or whatever, utility, whatever, they get the other half of that interest.
Okay.
Okay. You're never losing money. That's one of the biggest things in the investment world. Warren Buffett says it all the time. The first rule of investing is never lose money. Okay. So for something like this, you don't lose money because your balance is always growing, but you're also using the engine of generation to fund whatever you want to fund.
It's interesting.
There are billions of dollars. I mean, we were talking about it before we went live. Tesla decided to put $1.5 billion into Bitcoin. Okay. Grayscale, which is one of the bigger cryptocurrency fund managers, is putting hundreds of millions of dollars into Ethereum. Ethereum is about to go through a transition to Ethereum 2.0, where it will generate staking rewards constantly, change from a proof of work to a proof of stake cryptocurrency type, and that will generate rewards for whoever has Ethereum in their wallet. What I want to be able to do is I want to find somebody to code a wallet to say, I want to put one Ethereum in. It's going to generate 7.5%, and I want part of that to come into compound. I want part of it to go here and part of it to go there.
Okay.
The system itself is going to continue to generate new coins. And as we've seen, I mean, let me bring up the Bitcoin chart again that we were looking at. It's gone from 10,000 to 56,000. No, almost 57,000 now. It's 56,800 as we speak.
It's insane.
just since October. Okay, and this is from institutions putting their capital reserves into Bitcoin because the US dollar is collapsing.
Wow.
So this is Bitcoin, and we can also look at Ethereum because it has now hit $2,000 per token, per coin, and it also has gone up crazy high. Back in October, it was 413, and now it's 2,000. We are in a bull run. We are in a quick rise, and it likely will fall. But every single time we do this, it falls by not as much. So the overall trend of all of these, of at least the top two, is going up, falling down a little bit, going up even more.
Wow.
So what do you have anything else that you want? We're at 50 minutes in. I've really enjoyed this.
Me too. Thank you.
Any other things that you might want to present or talk about?
No, really. We've covered quite a few topics, and it's difficult to. It's a big topic, transitioning from where we are to a world where we're not, where we're cooperating instead of competing. It's just a whole different way of thinking about the world, and getting people to even consider that is, it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is. But we gotta try somehow. Because I want to get to that type 1 level, and I want to see the way we put it in the LUF communities is I want to see Asgard. I want to see Elysium. I want to see us build space stations, and I want to see us build domes on the moon and Mars to be able to live wherever we want. The one thing that I will say about the Venus Project that kind of bugs me is it seems to be a plateau.
Yeah. So he's just providing that this is what it could look like, but he does explicitly state that it will always change, and what he provides here may not be what it actually ends up looking like, because this is just how he envisions it in his time, right? It's always going to change. It's always going to evolve, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I didn't get into Jacques Fresco. I got into Buckminster Fuller.
Okay.
And it's much the same. I wish those two had gotten together more than they did. But I think we're getting into new engineering with new material science that is going to blow what we have now out of the water, especially with battery technology.
Yeah, definitely.
I watched a video that I think I shared with you, and I know I shared it online. It is an economics report about how to do the transition, and that a society built exclusively on photovoltaic solar power, onshore wind, not even offshore, but just pure onshore wind, and battery storage for power, for grid power, could provide all of the energy that we need for our grid for the entire planet.
Yeah, it's if you want to read a book, read The New Human Rights Movement by Peter Joseph. He has Appendix A. He goes through that and goes through solar, wind, geothermal, goes through all that stuff.
Yep.
And it's really amazing what the potential is. My preference is geothermal and tidal, since those are baseload types, but definitely using solar and wind as well to support that is definitely, very good.
Another good source, another good book that I might recommend is Tom Hartman's The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight.
Okay.
Talking about the end of peak oil and the transition away from fossil fuels and what that would take.
Okay. Yeah, he's pretty cool. I've only watched him just a little bit.
Okay. I'm going to say that we've had a great conversation. This has been fun.
Yeah, I have too. Thank you so much. I appreciate being on here and having access to your audience.
All right. I will see you online, and I will be continuing to work on the videos. I'm still working on Teradyne. Trying to get that out within the next couple of weeks. I've had some family stuff going on that I've needed to fix. So that's been delaying me, but hopefully the foot is healing now. So I'll be able to get more into making videos.
Hmm.
I want to thank everybody for watching and enjoy the weekend. And let's go back to that. This is what I'm watching, and it's a really exciting thing to watch. This is part of that transition, moving to cryptocurrencies, moving to blockchain systems. It is happening, whether we are ready for it or not, whether we like it or not. And I'm not, I'm putting $200 every paycheck into the regular stock market and $25 a week into cryptocurrency.
Oh, wow.
And right now, my cryptocurrency accounts are about 60% of my overall portfolio because of this rise, because of the incredible growth that we've seen just in the last 90 days, the last 120 days. And I don't expect that to stop anytime soon. And when it does, I'll be ready for it. So I hope you are too. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.